Good evening. You're watching Brass Tacks with me, Zakka Jacob. In just a few hours, Prime Minister Modi will be meeting with US President Donald Trump at the White House. This is the first meeting of both leaders in Trump 2.0, ahead of which Trump is expected to announce reciprocal tariffs on all countries, including India, which could impact Indian exporters negatively. But that is just one issue that will be discussed tonight when the two leaders meet. There is defense, there is immigration, both legal and now illegal as well. There is strategic cooperation, the Quad, countering the rising threat of China. The plate is really full when both Prime Minister Modi and President Trump meet. Let's also put this into a degree of context. President Trump has been barely a month into office, in fact, just a little over 3 weeks, and Prime Minister Modi will become the fourth head of government to be received at the White House in Trump 2.0. Prior to this, there was Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, the Japanese Prime Minister, the King of Jordan, and now, today, Prime Minister Modi. We will have tonight, over the next 1 hour, the best panel of international relations experts and former diplomats, the best panel that any television channel can put together. They will be joining us through the course of the next hour to try and make sense of this big meeting between Prime Minister Modi and President Trump, which is due in about 6 hours' time. But before that, the big looming threat of the Trump tariffs. In fact, the White House press secretary spoke about it last night.
Something he believes strongly in, and it's very simple logic as to why the president wants to impose reciprocal tariffs. It's the golden rule, which we all learned when we were growing up in school. Treat others the way you want to be treated, and far too many nations around this world have been ripping off the United States of America for far too long.
Modi-Trump closed-door meeting will cover a range of bilateral issues. Both leaders are looking to strengthen what has been a decades-old strategic partnership. Here's what they will be looking at as far as their agenda is concerned. The key issue, of course, and because it's happening right before this meeting at the White House, is going to be on tariffs. This is a huge bugbear for Mr. Trump. He's already imposed 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum. He's threatened tariffs on Canada and Mexico. He's put that on hold for a month. He's already imposed tariffs on China, and India too has a trade surplus with the United States. So he has, in the past, called India a tariff king. So both nations are keen on expanding trade. Modi and Trump could even possibly look at a limited trade deal, and that could offset some of this heat from the trade surplus and the looming Trump tariffs, as it were. Then there is defense ties between India and the United States. It goes back a long way. It used to be in single-digit percentage-wise, but now it's in double digits. India imports a lot of defense tech from the United States. In fact, the last time the Prime Minister had gone for the state visit in 2023, they signed the purchase of advanced defense systems like the MQ-9 Predator drones, the transfer of technology of the GE 414 engines for HAL to make the Tejas Mark II. All of these are in the pipeline. Indian interest in acquiring US defense tech and missile systems is very well known. In fact, after the call that they had on the 27th of January, the White House readout basically said that Trump expects India to buy more American weapons. Energy security is another priority. Refined petroleum products are, again, one big item that's traded from India to the United States, exported from India to the United States. So India will be looking at procuring more US energy. Also a bugbear that India has been procuring a lot of cheap Russian oil. You might see a bit of rebalancing there. So that's, again, something that both leaders will be talking about. Cooperation in nuclear tech. This is something that India has been looking forward to for a number of years now, in fact, since the 2005 Indo-US nuclear deal. But in this particular case, especially after those three Indian nuclear entities, including BARC and IGCAR, etc., were taken off the blacklist, India is looking at small modular reactors, or SMRs, in the civil nuclear space. The recent controversy over the deportation of illegal Indians, over 100 of them were handcuffed and shackled and brought in a US military aircraft to Amritsar. That is something, again, that could likely come up in the talks. Back home, many are pinning their hopes on Prime Minister Modi to raise this issue with Trump and ensure that at least these people are treated in a humane fashion. There are about 17,000 more who are awaiting their final orders, who could potentially be next in line to be shipped back to India. Immigration policies, the challenges faced by Indian professionals, H-1B, again, has been a long-standing issue between India and the United States. President Trump has taken a slightly nuanced and different position on H-1B now compared to his first term. So again, that's an issue that could likely come up in the discussion. Also, Foreign Minister Jaishankar mentioned this when he was there for the inauguration. It shouldn't take over a year for Indian nationals to wait to get a US visa, even a tourist visa, B1, B2 as they call it. You shouldn't be having to wait for over a year to get these visas, whether it's for workers, whether it's for students. That again is a point that could likely come up in the discussions. And also Prime Minister Modi and President Trump might find ways to streamline the backlog as far as legal immigration is concerned. So a whole bunch of things that they would like to talk about when that meeting happens at 2:30 a.m. India time. I want to first go across to Julia Benbrook from the White House. She's the CNN correspondent joining us live. Thank you very much, Julia, for speaking with us. So I just laid out what the Prime Minister and the President are expected to talk about. But just ahead of those talks, we have 11:30 IST, 1 p.m. ET scheduled press conference by the President where he will be declaring his reciprocal tariffs. India, too, is concerned about it. What are we looking at?
Well, in just a matter of hours, President Trump is going to host Prime Minister Modi here at the White House. The two of them are expected to sit down for a bilateral meeting, then host a joint press conference, and then have dinner. But as you mentioned, looming over all of this is Trump's promise that he's going to impose sweeping reciprocal tariffs. This is something that he has been teasing for several days. And when asked to explain his reasoning and what these tariffs are going to look like, he has said, quote, very simply, if they charge us, we charge them. And in the past, he has called India a tariff king and a tariff abuser. So no doubt going to be some interesting conversations today, but it is possible that Trump and Modi are able to either avoid or delay these tariffs throughout their conversations. You know, according to commerce data, India exported $87 billion worth of goods to the United States last year, and the United States exported $42 billion worth of goods to India. And Modi's team has experience working with many members of the Trump group and Trump himself from his first administration.
I do also want to ask you, I mean, the fact that there is such an official visit by a head of government calling on the new president in his second term, within barely a month of him coming into office for the second term, who are the other leaders he's met with in the 3 weeks that he's been in office? And what may this say about the importance that the Trump White House attaches with its relationship with India?
So there have been several different world leaders here at the White House in these first few weeks of Trump's term. He's had an emphasis on that. And the first world leader that he hosted was Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu. And there was, of course, a big focus on the war in Gaza during that meeting. Trump made a lot of headlines when he said that the United States should, quote, take over the Gaza Strip. And that led to more interesting conversations. Just earlier this week, he hosted Jordan's King Abdullah. And prior to that meeting, Trump had said that he could withhold aid from Jordan and Egypt if they didn't go along with his plan for the United States to seize control of the Gaza Strip and then take in Palestinians as well. So lots of big topics being talked about today, and no doubt that Modi and Trump will cover a wide range of issues. We'll hear from them when they first go into the Oval Office and they have what's called a spray when the press is in there. But a lot is going to take place behind closed doors as well. And then we'll get a little bit of a recap during that expected press conference.
All right, Julia Benbrook, live for us from the White House tonight. Thank you very much. We'll be in touch with you in the run-up to and, of course, post that meeting between Prime Minister Modi and President Trump. Let's now open this up to our panelists. We've got a fine panel of former diplomats, international relations experts who are joining us to try and make sense of what are the issues that will be on the table as Prime Minister Modi and President Trump meet at the White House. Harsh Shringla is the former Foreign Secretary to the Government of India, former Indian Ambassador to the United States. Welcome to the broadcast. Lisa Curtis, former Deputy Assistant to the President, also former NSA Senior Director for South and Central Asia. Welcome, Lisa. Michael Kugelman is Director with the South Asia Institute at the Woodrow Wilson Center. Welcome, Michael. And Rick Rosso is Chair of the U.S.-India Policy Studies at CSIS. Thank you and welcome, Rick. Let me start with you, Foreign Secretary Shringla. I just laid out the lay of the land. You heard our CNN colleague, Julia, from the White House. So a couple of hours before the meeting between Prime Minister Modi and President Trump is due to happen, there's going to be this press conference announcing new reciprocal tariffs. Should India be worried? How should India navigate this whole business of reciprocal tariffs?
Well, given our experience with Trump 1.0, I've always maintained that our policy in Trump 2.0 should be preemptive and proactive. And I think to a certain extent we have, because the last budget reflected, lower tariffs, keeping in mind U.S. concerns. I'm sure Prime Minister Modi has, is equipped with other proposals in terms of tariff reductions. We don't know what nature of announcement will emerge today. But even if we were to suppose that there would be reciprocal tariffs on India, I think there's scope to discuss that between the two principals. And as in the case of Canada and Mexico, you can always, have that particular. But as far as we are concerned, I think, the fact that the United States is our largest trading partner, we also have clearly, surplus trade balance with the U.S. There is an attempt to accommodate U.S. concerns, whether it is by increasing oil and gas purchases, whether it is by opening up the defense sector through purchases of military vehicles or jet engines, or whether it is looking at advanced or small modular reactors, which you just mentioned, or even, I would say, looking at possible agreements concluded very quickly on giving more access to American products such as agricultural items, medical devices, medical equipment, chemicals, etc. So there's a range of options that are available. I have no doubt that Prime Minister Modi will be discussing that with President Trump.
Okay.
And I'm sure that whatever the discussions, it will take our relationship, that much forward. We will emerge stronger, and I think the relationship will be able to outline for us the next steps in that very strong strategic partnership between our two countries.
Let me get Lisa into this conversation, because I was speaking to Professor Mearsheimer. I'll play out that conversation a little later on here in the program, and he was saying that Trump has almost a William McKinley 1925 attitude towards trade. He's got a very mercantilist attitude towards trade. He believes that tariffs are not just a negotiating tool, but he believes that, to quote Trump in his own words, the rest of the world has been ripping America off. In the last few weeks, we've seen Trump threaten Canada and Mexico with tariffs, and he's put that on a pause because they've committed to more troops at the border. He's threatened and implemented tariffs against China, and just earlier this week, flat out 25% tariffs on all steel and aluminum coming into the United States. What does India learn from these examples as to how India can navigate this touchy issue with Trump?
Well, I think India has already demonstrated that it has learned from Trump's first term how important it is, the tariff issue, and to see other countries reduce tariffs, and to see, fair trade and reciprocal trade with countries. And so, Prime Minister Modi is playing his cards right. He's already announced some lowering of tariffs. For example, on high-end motorcycles, he's announced a reduction in tariffs. And, he's likely to offer to buy more oil and gas from the United States, like India did during the first Trump term, to reduce the trade deficit. So I think India is already acting preemptively to try to meet Trump halfway on the trade issue. The problem is, I suspect that it's not going to be enough. I think President Trump feels very confident this time. He's made a remarkable political comeback here in the United States. And we see, with Canada, Mexico, he's made very strong demands on the tariff issue. So
Okay.
I think we can expect that he'll want to see more. He'll want to see more commitment by India to negotiate a good trade deal. I think the best outcome we could expect from this meeting is that they announce a fast-track trade negotiation, so that both sides demonstrate goodwill toward trying to come to some accommodation on the trade issue. And then, of course, the question will be, will India be able to follow through on making even further reductions in its tariffs and reducing that trade deficit.
So on that question, I mean, I was looking at the data, the stuff that India exports to the US, Michael Kugelman, the top 3 or 4 things. You have gems and jewelry, which is polished gems and jewelry, which are exported back to the US. That's one big item. You have compounds, pharmaceutical compounds for the manufacture of generic drugs. That's, again, a big item of export. There's refined petroleum products, again, big equipment. Medical equipment, which India sends to the US. So these are about the 3 or 4 big ticket items when it comes to export of goods from India to the US. Where can India lower duties in these items? Because if Trump were to say reciprocal tariffs, then which of these sectors will be hardest hit? And secondly, I think a lot of people have been talking about what Lisa just said, that look, if you look at the first Trump term, he was very keen on a trade deal with India. They even agreed upon some kind of a limited trade deal, but it didn't eventually get signed off because of various other factors, COVID, etc. Do you think that would be India's best strategy? Go in there and say, Mr. President, we want to cut a deal. You tell us what you want, and this is what we can give you.
Well, I think so. I mean, I do think that what might seem like an obstacle could be an opportunity, and I think that yes, I mean, there might be an opportunity during this visit for the Prime Minister to propose just that, some type of negotiations toward some type of an arrangement, not an FTA. I think it's much too premature to talk about something like that, but some type of discussion towards some type of economic partnership accord or something like that, that in due course would enable both sides to be comfortable lowering tariffs. But more in the immediate term, I think that one thing that India's government has in its favor is that it knows Trump quite well. Of course, the current Modi cabinet is mainly the same Modi cabinet that was in power during Modi's second term, which overlapped with several years of the first Trump administration. I think this is one reason why we have seen, in my view, India's government do everything right when it comes to trying to reduce the likelihood of facing the brunt of Trump's tariff threats. And indeed, the fact that, as others have noted, India has publicly signaled its willingness to reduce tariffs, and indeed has, in fact, reduced some tariffs, as we heard when the budget was rolled out. I think that's an indication of how this government understands how Trump thinks and how he works. But this is not going to be easy. You're going to have very difficult negotiators on both sides. But I do think that the best option, or one of the best options, is for India to come ready to make clear that it's ready to talk, while understanding that any type of negotiation will certainly take some time and could be very difficult. I agree with what Lisa said, that even though India has taken some steps so far to show its willingness to make concessions on the tariff front, it's not going to be enough for the president, who will want to see more. But there are other things that India could do in the immediate term. I think it's very clear that the Indian government has indicated a willingness to try to look into buying more energy, more oil, maybe LNG from the U.S. Not too long ago, a few years ago, India was the top destination for U.S. oil exports. Obviously, things changed a lot after the war in Ukraine began. So the energy area might be a place to look at as well.
Rick Rosso, I want to come to the second issue, and again, because this is such a big priority for the Trump administration, about immigration. I know legal immigration, H-1B, has always been a bit of a bugbear in the relationship between India and the United States. But now there's also the problem of illegal immigration. And I'm sure you followed the story about these 100-odd illegal Indian immigrants who were sent back on a U.S. military plane last week, touchdown in Amritsar. And there was a huge furor in the Indian parliament. The opposition parties raised the hackle, saying, you can't just handcuff them and bring them in shackles and so on. Do you reckon that the Modi administration, that there is a way in which the Modi administration can sort of take up this issue with President Trump, given how touchy he is, and he's demonstrated in the 3 weeks that he's been in office about this issue of illegal immigration?
Yeah, I don't think there's a big challenge or question about whether or not illegal immigration is there, whether India will take back people, but to do it in, I think, a kinder, gentler, more humane way, I think that's something that you could have a breakthrough in the conversation today, and to make sure that you don't have these visuals coming out where you're sending shackled people back to India for these 40-hour-long flights and such. So I suspect that can be managed, and I feel that there is kind of a recognition in Delhi that this is it's an issue that India has the capacity to deal with on bringing people back. So it's not so much about the deportations; it's more in the manner and how. And I think the leaders should be able to hopefully sort that out. But then you've got the big debate in the Trump camp about what about
Correct.
immigration for people with specialized skills, where a lot of the base that maybe support Trump in office doesn't like immigration at all. But some of the people closest to President Trump do appreciate and understand that tech workers, skilled workers, there's a gap in the United States, and companies need that to be able to grow. So I think that's where you're going to have maybe more challenging conversations, even within Trump's own camp, about how to manage this other vital, important part of the relationship with India.
Ambassador Shringla, I want to come to defense. And obviously, there's a great degree of convergence, a lot of transactions that happen between India and the United States when it comes to defense. I was there at the White House last time the Prime Minister was there for a state visit. They announced the MQ-9 Predator drones. They announced the GE jet engine deal. Of course, there are a few issues therein. But I think fundamentally, where Trump is different from previous presidents is that he just views defense as a buyer-seller relationship. In fact, even after the phone call that they had in the last week of January, the readout from the White House said Trump expects India to buy more American-made defense equipment. Whereas for India, it's a question of co-production, joint intellectual property rights, transfer of technology, and also some amount of fillip to make in India. How do these two visions converge?
So clearly, there are certain items, equipment that we do require, which would involve immediate imports, but over a period of time would have to increasingly, be first assembled and then manufactured in India. And one example of that is the Striker vehicle. India has a requirement of military vehicles. There is a proposal for, this item to be provided by the United States. So it involves a certain number of items to come in its full form, and then gradually you have assembly and then manufacturing in India, and that's the sort of compromise that can be reached. What we're talking about is joint partnerships on defense equipment items, which also involve purchase, but at the same time, I think using Indian talent, using Indian R&D. And, I would say very cost-effective manufacturing to contribute to that process. So what I think, have to propose is a win-win situation. And some of it is, I think, on the table, whether it is, transport vehicles, whether it is jet engines. I think there is going to be some discussion on defense acquisitions and defense manufacturing. And clearly, I think this is an important area, for President Trump, of course, but also for India, because we need our armed forces also to have cutting-edge equipment, and we also need that level of preparedness that is very important. And I would say it would be a partnership that would work well for both countries, especially given our shared strategic interests in the Indo-Pacific region.
All right. We've just got also a senior White House official, not named though, saying that India and the United States will sign a new defense framework. I believe the first defense framework was signed in 2005, then subsequently updated in 2015, and there will be new defense framework that will be announced today. Also, we're getting word that there will be talk about a possible limited trade deal, a fair bilateral trade partnership, which could be announced as soon as the fall or as early as the fall of 2025. And we know the fall of 2025 is the likely timeline that they're looking at when they could have the Quad meeting. And India, of course, is to host the Quad meeting this time around. So I'm just going to ask our producers to put both of that on our breaking news panel. So this is the word that we're getting from a senior White House official. Again, unnamed senior White House official. So Lisa Curtis, I want your first thoughts on both of this. A fair bilateral trade partnership, which could be announced by the fall of 2025. I presume it would be when President Trump comes here for the Quad meeting. And two, the new defense framework. Do you think that's just continuation, more of the same?
No, I don't think this is more of the same. I think this is very positive. I just said earlier that it would be considered a success if they could announce a fast-track trade negotiation, which it sounds like indeed they will. So I think this is very positive, and this will set a tone that they are both trying to meet each other halfway on the trade issues. So I think that's very positive. And of course, the question will be more over the long term, will they actually be able to complete it in a 6-month time frame? That's very ambitious. And then in terms of the defense framework, also very positive. This is an opportunity to show the long-term interest that both countries have in building this relationship. This will show the strategic commitment that both sides have to the relationship, and they'll be able to talk about the future of the defense partnership, what that means for the Indo-Pacific region,
All right.
and establishing, peace and security and deterrence. So this is very positive that we'll have both of the agreements, one related to trade, one related to the defense strategic partnership.
I've got more information, and this is a senior White House official who's spoken to my colleague Parikshit Luthra from our sister channel CNBC. Parikshit is at the White House right now. So just a little more info that he has, and we'll try and get him on the phone as well. He says, according to this senior White House official, India does not expect Trump's reciprocal tariffs to significantly impact India. India and the U.S. set to announce a roadmap for a strong trade pact with sector-specific arrangements. India to give more access to U.S. industrial goods, and India to seek more access for labor-intensive manufacturing products. U.S. tariffs on Canada and Mexico have opened a huge opportunity for India. That's an interesting sort of phrase. India and the U.S. could announce a trade deal by the fall of 2025. Joint statement will also strongly condemn terrorism, including Khalistani terrorism. So, Michael Kugelman, what do you make of that?
Well, I think all of this is very encouraging. I think reflects just how special this relationship is. I mean, let's keep in mind that the Trump administration has only been in office for 3 weeks, less than a month. You still have a number of top India-focused posts that have not been filled. And if we're hearing that we're going to have some pretty substantive outcomes here along the lines of this new defense framework and plans for a trade negotiation and all, that's pretty significant. And on the issue of condemning Khalistan terrorism, that would obviously be a major shift in U.S. policy from the Biden administration. So, all in all, of course, we'll still need to hear more information about what this all entails. I think this is really quite encouraging. And again, I mean, how many relationships do you have like this where, the Trump administration is only 3 weeks into office, and already you're talking about all these significant developments. So far, it sounds like this is all a very good thing for the partnership.
I want to ask Rick Rosso before we get Parikshit on the line. The idea that the U.S. tariffs on Canada and Mexico have opened a huge opportunity for India, and that India and the U.S. could announce a trade deal by the fall of this year. If you could sort of make sense of that for our viewers, what would be the opportunities for India if the tariffs on Canada and Mexico go through?
Well, you think about some of the areas that we have a lot of imports coming from Canada and Mexico. I think in particular, the areas that India has shown real terrific abilities in production. We already talked about pharmaceuticals is already a major export item, but we bring a lot of that in for both Canada and Mexico. It may present new opportunities for Indian pharmaceutical firms. I think of autos and auto components because you've seen a lot of U.S. auto manufacturing moving to our neighbors. If those tariffs hit Canada and Mexico hard in the auto space, maybe Indian auto manufacturing has more capacity. A lot of Indian component producers and others already have major exports to the United States. So there are some real strong areas, some of which have a lot of potential for job creation in India that could also help to supplement, I think, rising industries here in the United States, which would be mutually beneficial. So that's just a few of the areas I can think about that might directly benefit by these tariffs on our two neighbors.
And there's also a line, and I want Ambassador Shringler to weigh in on this. The Trump administration, and there will be some mention of this in the joint statement as well, that they remain committed to the multilateral arrangements like Quad, I2U2, IMEC. How do you see Trump's sort of vision and the way he wants to, put an end to the Israel-Hamas war in Gaza, and then eventually get, Saudi Arabia on board for the Abraham Accords and so on, and his commitment to these multilateral arrangements, whether it's Quad with an eye on China or whether it is IMEC with an eye on allowing Indian goods to go through the Middle East and eventually to Western Europe?
So, a cessation of conflict in the Middle East, a sort of a settlement of that issue in whatever manner as possible would, I think, pave the way for a resumption of, the Abraham Accords. And we have to keep in mind both the I-2, U2 and, ultimately the India-EU Middle East corridor were designed to support that very initiative that would, bring peace and greater connectivity to and through the Middle East. And I think the fact that we are looking at a possibility that there might be an opportunity to resume talks on the Abraham's Accord. President Trump is talking about talking to the Saudis, talking to the Jordanians on possibly taking this forward. I mean, obviously there are complications. It's going to be. I mean, it's never easy in the Middle East. But if it works in the manner that is being envisaged, I think there is scope to try and revitalize those economic initiatives that could be a very important part of that overall effort to make this a vital region and connect Europe, the Middle East, India in a way that has never been done before.
All right.
And I think India is completely committed.
All right.
Completely committed to this, to these initiatives. The Prime Minister has a very, very strong, I would say, sense that these would make a critical difference to the region. And I see Prime Minister Modi fully reinforcing President Trump's efforts in that direction.
All right. Ambassador Shringla, Lisa Curtis, Michael Kugelman, Rick Rosso, thank you very much for joining us in the run-up to the big visit by Prime Minister Modi to the White House. I have Parikshit with me on the line now. So Parikshit, some big expectations ahead of that meeting, and you've spoken to a senior White House official who says defense, trade, all of these, you could see some big ticket announcements after the meeting happens today at the White House. Tell us more.
That's right. Clearly, there are defense procurement deals being discussed. In fact, a senior White House official said that talks are moving on very, very positively, and these defense procurements from India will bring down the trade deficit as well. Now, in the run-up to this visit, we have been telling our viewers that it's possible that India could order more Hercules transport aircraft and also P-8I maritime patrol aircraft for the Indian Navy, which will significantly bring down the trade deficit. On the entire trade partnership itself, the US administration seems to be acknowledging the steps taken in the budget to give tariff concessions, reduce tariffs on high-end luxury cars, high-end motorcycles, electric vehicle batteries. So the White House official observed that India's early body language and modest steps towards reducing trade deficits are welcome. Talks between Modi and Trump will further provide momentum, solidify a fair bilateral trade partnership which could be announced by fall of 2025. We also spoke to sources in the Indian government who said that yes, those reciprocal tariffs are coming today. We're watching out for it, but we don't expect it to significantly impact India right now. In fact, these tariffs could be an opportunity for India to export more, to be a bigger supplier for the world. What we're learning from our sources that Modi and Trump today could announce a clear roadmap to have a limited trade deal by the fall of 2025 when Donald Trump visits. This is the information that we are picking up right now. And today, there could be a arrangement for a trade pact or a roadmap for a trade pact announced in the joint statement, which could have sector-specific arrangements as well. For example, defense, for example, energy trade. And White House officials have outlined defense, energy as major sectors which will bring down the trade deficit. In fact, White House officials have just said and told us that US wants to be an energy powerhouse of the world. It has the capacity to power the Indian economy, and that synchronizes with India's economic interests right now. So clearly, we are going to see long-term LNG crude oil contracts with US energy companies, and that is going to figure in the joint statement. We're also told that there'll be strong wording on terrorism, especially Khalistani terrorism, in the joint statement. Areas such as AI, innovation will be touched upon. When it comes to the contours of a trade pact, we're told that we will give more access to US industrial goods as they've been asking. On the Indian side, we would want access for goods where our MSMEs are involved in the supply chain very closely, and areas where we have a lot of labor-intensive manufacturing. So we'd like to strike a balance as far as the trade goes, and we want to have a win-win relationship.
All right, it's going to be a fun night. Thanks very much for joining us. Parikshit Luthra there reporting for us from our sister channel CNBC TV 18. He's got the scoop on what we can likely expect in the joint statement post the meeting between Prime Minister Modi and President Trump. So, just a few hours as we are counting down to the big meeting between Prime Minister Modi and President Trump at the Oval Office at the White House. Prime Minister Modi will become just the fourth world leader, head of government, to be meeting with President Trump this early in his second term. He's barely been 3 weeks into office in his second term. What can we expect? And of course, there is the looming threat of tariffs. How does India navigate that? I'm now joined by one of the most erudite and scholarly voices in the world of international affairs, professor at the University of Chicago, Professor John Mearsheimer. Thank you very much for joining us here on CNN News 18.
My pleasure to be here, as always.
So, Professor, let's start with the magnitude of this visit in itself. First, there was Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel. Then the Japanese Prime Minister. Earlier this week, you had the King of Jordan. So today for you, Prime Minister Modi will become just the fourth world leader to get an audience with President Trump. What do you make of that?
Well, I think there's no question that the chemistry between Modi and Trump is excellent. And Trump has all sorts of incentives to have good relations with India. Trump is famous for picking fights with other countries, but there's really no reason for him to pick a fight with India. And if anything, he has powerful incentives to have good relations with India. So I find it hardly surprising that Modi would be among the first leaders that he would bring to the White House to talk to.
But just ahead of that, there is this looming threat of the Trump tariffs. In fact, the president has just tweeted that later tonight he will be announcing reciprocal tariffs, and he's quoted in his characteristic style, "Make America Great Again." How worried should India be about this?
I don't think they should be terribly worried. I think that Trump is mainly focused on Mexico and Canada here in the Western Hemisphere. He's certainly focused on China. He wants to pick a fight with China. And in that case, India is an ally. And he is especially interested in causing trouble for the Europeans. Those are his principal targets. This is not to say there won't be some collateral damage for India, but I don't think there'll be much at all. And of course, Prime Minister Modi is well aware of the fact that he has to come to Washington and he has to do something to accommodate President Trump. And he will do that. He's a sophisticated politician. He knows how to operate with somebody like Trump. So I think that if there's any damage, it'll be limited.
So if you could explain for our viewers, what is the Trump worldview on tariffs? Some say he uses the threat of tariffs as a negotiating tool. He wants to get people on board, and then eventually, they succumb and they give him what he wants. There are some who say, he believes in his veins that America has been ripped off by the global trade arrangement, the WTO, and so on. So he views trade deficits that America has and trade surpluses that other countries like India have with America. India, I think, has about a $45 billion trade surplus, almost like a sin, and he wants to correct that. So if you could, it's almost like a 1925 William McKinley kind of view when it comes to trade and tariffs.
Yeah, I think that he believes that the United States is being ripped off by countries around the world. And I think this is why he has such a beef with the Europeans. It's not just the fact that you have these trade deficits. It's also the fact that the United States spends an enormous amount of money to defend Europe. And he thinks this is ridiculous. We shouldn't be defending Europe. Europe should be defending itself. They should be spending much more money on defense. But what's happening here? We're getting ripped off. This is his mentality. And I also think that he is something of a bully, and he likes to push weaker countries around, and he even likes to push his adversaries around. And one of his favorite levers for doing that is tariffs. He thinks that he can get other countries to dance to his tune by using tariffs as a weapon. And you saw this with Canada and Mexico. And from India's point of view, I think the good thing is that he has no real problem with India. It's not like the Europeans where we're defending Europe. We're not defending India. And India is not like Mexico or Canada. So in a very important way, India sort of escapes his wrath. and is not high up on his target list, which is all for the good for India.
The other issue, which is of great concern to the Trump White House, and especially in this term, is immigration. Now we have the specter of both illegal immigration and legal immigration. I want to deal with the illegal immigration part first, because here in India, I'm not sure you've been following the story. Here in India, there was a lot of consternation around this U.S. military aircraft carrying about 100-odd illegal Indian immigrants that were sent back to India, and they were brought back in handcuffs and chains, and they were shackled. The issue became so big, the opposition parties raised it in Parliament. And the government did say that, we will try and sensitize the Trump administration to be a little more humane to the problem of these illegal immigrants. India, by some estimates, and I think this is a Pew Research study from 2022, the country with the third highest number of illegal immigrants in the United States, more than 700,000 of them. How does the Modi government navigate this, given how sensitive this issue is for Mr. Trump and his administration?
Well, my sense is that the Modi government is willing to work with Trump on this issue and take the issue off the table as much as possible. The problem is, as you said, that the first tranche of illegal immigrants who came back to India were in chains and shackles. And obviously, this is disastrous for making this policy work. So my assumption would be that the Indians are talking to the Americans about making sure that it doesn't happen this way in the future, and therefore the situation should be handled more smoothly in the future. If it's not, it's going to become a huge problem for all the obvious reasons. But one would think that both sides, both India and the United States, have a vested interest in making this work smoothly.
Now I want to come to the problem of legal immigration, which, again, for a long time has been a bit of a bugbear in the relationship between New Delhi and Washington. This whole H-1B issue, India feels there's far too few H-1B visas that are being issued. While President Trump has seemingly made the right noises about H-1B, he says he likes H-1B. Of course, he's changed his position from the 2016 campaign. But this issue seems to have split his own supporters. You have his tech bros base, led by folks like Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, who are obviously very pro H-1B. And then you have his MAGA base, with people like Steve Bannon and Laura Loomer, if you will, who have just been on a rant against the H-1B. Which side of this, as the cookie crumbles, do you think Trump will lean on?
I think if Trump can work things out with India in terms of illegal immigration, I think he'll act in a way that's favorable to India on the H-1Bs. You can never be sure with Trump, as you well know, but it seems to me in this case that this one will play out in India's favor.
All right, so the biggest talking point ahead of Prime Minister Modi and President Trump's visit at the White House tonight is, of course, the threat of Trump tariffs. No country is immune to it. Canada, Mexico, China, you name it, even the European Union. Can India navigate? How can India navigate the threat of the Trump tariffs? Joining me now is Mr. Mukesh Aghi, the President and CEO of the U.S.-India Strategic Partnership Forum. Thank you very much for speaking with us here on CNN News 18, Mr. Aghi. This is, let's first contextualize just what a big deal this visit is, because it's barely been 3 weeks since President Trump came back to office in his second term. I think Prime Minister Modi would be just the third or fourth head of government to be visiting the White House this early in Trump 2.0. Just how significant is it that early on in his second term, President Trump is hosting the Prime Minister tonight at the White House?
It's very significant, Zakka, because you have to understand the Trump administration is not even 1 month in power, and they are basically defining, executing their agenda. While so far the focus has been on domestic reforms, especially trying to bring down the cost structure on the federal side, you will see this moving into the global environment. It is important for Prime Minister Modi to agree on a defined agenda between the two countries, priorities between the two countries, and see where you can find a sense of balance so there's a win-win value proposition between the two countries. So I think it's important that the Prime Minister meets with President Trump set the agenda, and take this forward itself.
I do want to talk about, the threat of the Trump tariffs. It's like the boy who cried wolf, right? Because, look, within the first few weeks in office, he's already sort of threatened Canada and Mexico with tariffs. He's put that on a pause. China already, the tariffs are well underway. He's imposed tariffs on steel and aluminum imports to the U.S. He's in the campaign. He's referred to India in the past as, a tariff manipulator and a trade manipulator, so on and so forth. How does Prime Minister Modi navigate the threat of these Trump tariffs? Because what could be the areas that he could look at and say, okay, Mr. President, here are the 2 or 3 items that we're exporting from India to the U.S. where we think we can rationalize some of the duties?
You have to understand that in the first Trump administration, India pushed for a mini trade deal to basically deal with the issue of tariff. And that deal didn't go through for whatever reason. And what we do expect is Trump coming back and saying, let's do a trade deal between the 2 countries. And when I come back in the fall time frame to India for the Quad Summit, let's sign the trade deal. So he will put some kind of time limits and guidelines to drive that. It is important to understand that tariffs is more of a negotiating ploy on the part of Trump, because we have seen it again and again itself. So India has taken a proactive approach by reducing some tariffs, but you have to understand the tariffs have come down on the average 2%. So India's average tariff is almost 13%. It's come down to 11. I think that's not still sufficient because U.S. number is more closer to 3%. So you will see some pressure coming in from the Trump team on India to bring some more tariffs down itself. And I think trade deal will be the way to basically negotiate, or at least circumvent some of the stuff immediately and take that forward.
So what may be the contours of that trade deal? What is it that India can offer the President of the United States to try and soften the blow, if you will? When in his first term, he did talk a lot about the Harley-Davidson motorcycle, right? So India has progressively reduced the duties on the motorcycle. But what are the other areas, or what may be the contours of that trade deal that India might be able to sort of sugar it up a bit?
I think you have to understand that if India is going to be a economy which is going to be export oriented, an economy which is going to compete on a global basis, it has to raise the bar of its companies to compete from that perspective and not be protected anymore. And so by opening up the market, it's not just for the US side, but also it puts pressure on domestic market to become much more competitive. And we have seen that when we opened the market to the banks. When the international bank came in, it put pressure on the local banks to raise the bar itself. We have seen then when the IT companies came from the US, they raised the bar and Indian companies started competing on a global basis. So I think opening of the market in a FTA is a win-win value proposition for everybody. Yes, you have to figure out how to protect the farmers. Yes, you have to figure out how to basically deal with the issue of agriculture arena. But I think that can be managed and worked upon because the Americans also always try to protect their farmers from that perspective. So a FTA where you can have free flow of goods and services. And I think that also gives an opportunity for India to look at basically mobility of its professionals. Because the biggest export India has to the US is IT services. And the biggest challenge is mobility. So I think that should also be put in the discussion on the FTA. So I think there's a way to manage this, and an FTA could be a solution between the 2 countries.
I do want to ask you one. All right, so how does India navigate? There are 2 parts to this conversation. One, of course, the threat of the Trump tariffs, and of course, the immigration issue, which has now come to the fore with the deportation of over 100 illegal immigrants. Joining me now is a U.S. Democrat congressman from the state of Michigan, one of the few Indian-American congressman who is in the House of Representatives. Mr. Sri Thanedar is a Democratic congressman joining us from the state of Michigan. Thank you very much, Congressman, for speaking with us. So this is going to be the first visit of Prime Minister Modi to meet President Trump in his second term as President of the United States. What are your big expectations? What can one look forward to in the meeting that's going to happen at the White House? later tonight.
Well, look, in the past, when these two leaders met, they had good chemistry. They have good friendship. Can that continue? Trump is in a different mood now. Trump has expressed a lot of concerns about India's tariffs. He called India a tariff king. So this is a time where the two countries need to get together in a way on a more of a friendlier path, continue that chemistry that they have built in the past. And one good thing that have happened is India has already, preemptively lowered the tariff on some goods so that more American products could be purchased in India. More trade could happen from the US to India. India currently have a $32 billion surplus. So what Trump is looking for is a more fair trading relationship, and both countries need to make certain concessions for that to happen. The trade could increase. They need to increase. Right now we are at about $120 billion, which is not very much. I think there is a lot more trade that can happen. India could purchase more military equipment from the United States, more energy, more technology. So there is a lot more collaboration that could happen, but this meeting needs to start on a right footing and continue the chemistry, the friendship that these two leaders have had in the past.
Now, one of the big concern areas, and we've already seen in the 3 weeks of Mr. Trump's second term in the White House, he's already imposed tariffs on steel and aluminum. He announced tariffs on Canada and Mexico, and he's put them on suspension for a month. He's already announced and implemented tariffs against China. India is also worried about imposition of tariffs. How does India navigate the threat of the Trump tariffs? Because Mr. Trump has referred to India in the past as a tariff king, as a trade manipulator, and so on. So how does Prime Minister navigate this sensitive issue when he meets with President Trump in a few hours from now?
It needs to. And India has already taken a good step in lowering some of the tariff unilaterally. So that is certainly a good start. And Mr. Trump is in a much more combative mood now in his second term, having won a mandate. He is much more on a combative terms with many countries in the world. He really feels that United States gets a raw deal, and he is trying to get the best leverage, best bargain he can get. And so the two countries need to work together in a more positive manner, in a more collaborative manner. If either country starts a tariff war, it's not going to be good for the people of either countries. The costs will go up, and in the end, the consumer, American consumer, would end up paying more. So it is very vital that this is a successful meeting. The friendship is re-established. And there is fairness on both sides.
One other thing that's come to the fore recently is this issue of illegal immigration. You saw last week the flight from San Antonio, Texas, the U.S. military aircraft carrying over 100 illegal Indian immigrants landing in Amritsar. They were in chains, shackled. There was a lot of outrage in the Indian parliament as well. Again, this is a sensitive issue for President Trump and for the Republicans. But for India too, the humanity with which these people are being treated, or the lack of it, has become a huge political issue. Again, how does the Prime Minister address this with President Trump, given how sensitive and how high up the pecking order this issue of illegal immigration has been for the Trump White House?
Well, look, it's because of the broken immigration system. We need to have legal pathways. We need to improve the U.S. immigration system. Certainly, no one should be breaking laws of the United States of America, whether it's the migrants that are crossing the borders illegally. They all need to follow United States laws, and our immigration system needs to create legal pathways so we don't have this mass entry of illegal migrants through our southern borders. So there is a lot that needs to be done, but there is no doubt that the migrants need to be treated in a humane way, in a dignified and respectful way, and not be humiliated. In the past, Biden administration did send back migrants who came illegally into the United States. They did send them back, but they were sent on commercial flights or charter aircraft, and not in a military aircraft, and not handcuffed. So again, dignity of these workers must be maintained. And certainly Mr. Modi is expected to bring this issue up, and Mr. Trump again may not make much concessions because he feels very strongly that nobody should be crossing U.S. borders illegally.
All right, Mr. Sri Thanedar, thank you very much for joining us, U.S. Congressman from the state of Michigan, joining us here on CNN News 18. Thank you.